Hey, it's Liberty, and today I'm continuing my series where I'm endeavouring to read more translated fiction, and this time we're travelling to Japan. I have more books to talk about than last time. I've got 3 books to talk about. This is obviously just the start of my journey around the world, so if you've got any recommendations for me, then do let me know by dropping a comment. If you like this, do give it a thumbs up, and I make videos all about books, etc. So do subscribe if you would like. I'm going to get straight into it, and I'm starting with my favourite. I'm not keeping you waiting until the end. That is Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. It was written by Satoshi Yagasawa and was translated by Eric Ozawa. If you've been into a bookshop in the last few years, you will have seen this on a table somewhere. This book follows Takako, who is 25 years old. Her relatively normal life in Tokyo is sort of upended when her boyfriend announced that he's getting married. She loses her job. She alienates herself from all the people around her. She kind of ends up in a deep depression, very rock bottom. While she's in this state, she receives a call from her uncle inviting her to come and live at the bookshop that he runs, which is sort of like the family bookshop. They were close when she was a child, but they had kind of drifted apart, and he'd always had a very unconventional life. His wife had left him 5 years ago as well, so he's literally on his own running the bookshop, and he kind of needs someone to be there, work there when he's not there. And also he's like, look, there's a flat above, so you can live there if you want. We get introduced to a suburb of Tokyo called Jinbukcho, and it's essentially where all the bookshops are. Takako used to kind of judge her uncle for his life, but she does reluctantly accept his offer and goes to live at the bookshop. Very much he knows that this is temporary, but Takako finds that this life is actually to her suiting. This is a novel very much about finding yourself, new beginnings, all kinds of relationships, not just romantic, familial, friendships, community, and of course the joys of books and reading. I adored this book. Shout out to my friend Annabelle who recommended this. Oh my god, I'm so grateful. This is what people would describe as a cozy read for sure. It kind of felt like being wrapped up in a blanket. It's written sort of in a journal type form. It kind of feels like you are jumping in and out of her life at various points, and I personally really enjoyed that. The cast of characters you kind of encountered during this book are so interesting. You don't just get obviously Takako and her uncle, and her uncle's wife comes into it at some point. You also get the regulars in the bookshop, and also a local cafe as well. It's it built the community and the life for Takako really, really well. Takako was such a easy protagonist to love and empathise with. And I love the relationship between her and her uncle. Their backstory was really heartwarming, and to sort of watch them reacquaint themselves as adults was really sweet. He very much is helping her sort of navigate this new phase of her life. Especially because this book seems to be all about sort of finding your happiness. And sort of different characters have different quests in order to find contentment and happiness in their life, and it's a joy to read. And it's very much like a love letter to sort of the everyday happiness and pleasure to be found in life. It's kind of a slice of life book for sure. Normally I don't really like that. When I'm watching TV shows and I see it's a slice of life, I kind of stay away from that. But actually this was gorgeous. I loved it. Also, something that I really enjoyed was the fact that they were talking about Japanese authors and particular books and what makes them so special. And if you're looking for recommendations, you can literally pick them out of the pages. It's just such a love letter to books and stories and writers, especially as several times they do talk about authors who are not so appreciated for their genius. Takako's journey to sort of thinking that this bookshop was this really musty old place and not really wanting to spend time there, to someone who really comes to love and enjoy not just reading, but the bookshop itself, was just glorious. As a former bookseller, I love reading about other booksellers. And normally you get into bookselling because you love books. And so to see someone have that journey of loving books through the art of talking to people about them was really interesting. Also, as someone being in the UK, when I read books set in other countries, part of the joy is sort of finding myself exploring different areas of the country, discovering the landscape, etc. And as well as being in Tokyo, we sort of get out of Tokyo for a little bit, especially in the second half of the book. We take a sort of trip to the mountains, and we sort of see the tranquility that brings to Takako and all the other people. I know that there were some people who were frustrated about how the second half of the book is not at the bookshop, and also sort of there's a lot of Takiko's uncle's wife in that second half of the book. Like, personally, I feel like that completely fits within Takiko's trajectory as a character, I feel like. And also the point of the bookshop is to like spark that change within her, and that change keeps on going. It was like a safe haven that she found herself returning to, and it kind of helps to physically ground a place that Takiko comes to appreciate as like her home base, associated with her family and love and community and friends. And also like that shift with bringing her aunt into the story, like it is, again, it's a shift towards Takiko finding meaning within her family and familial relationships, and like what truly is important to her in her life. Because obviously we start this book with a breakup, a dissolution of like romantic love. And we do get someone who sort of comes along the scene in the second half of the book that is potentially like reigniting some romantic hopes within her. But I'm not going to spoil too much about that because... So yeah, I mean, I rated this 5 stars. I had a fantastic time. I loved basically every aspect of this book, from the characters to the plot to the setting to the vibes and aesthetic, and I loved it. I had such a good time. There is another book, More Days at the Murasaki Bookshop, which I'm so excited to check out. So yeah, really great start to the video. Next, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This is by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and it was translated by Jeffrey Trousselon. I hope I pronounced that right. So this book is set in sort of a basement coffee shop in a back alley in Tokyo that has been in business for over 100 years. There's a local legend that you can sort of travel back in time somehow in this cafe. This book is set over the course of one summer, and we sort of follow 4 different people as they use the cafe for that purpose. Like any time travel mechanism, there is a lot of rules. Most importantly, a trip only lasts as long as it takes for the coffee to get cold. First customer is a woman who sort of wants to revisit a conversation with her ex-boyfriend who has essentially sort of left to go work abroad. The second is a married couple, one of whom has dementia. The third is like 2 sisters, and then the fourth is a mother and daughter. I listened to this as an audiobook because of course I did. Because this book is set in one location, we really sort of get to know the people who work in the cafe pretty well by the end, and I thought that that whole environment, it was built up quite well throughout the book. This is very slow paced. It's a story that very much focuses on the characters and character development, so if you want a lot of plot and you want something fast moving, this is not going to be for you. Also, personally, people call this book cozy a lot, and I completely disagree. Like, this book is not cozy. It's slow paced and it's sort of set in like one location and it's kind of quiet, but it's not cozy. Like, it was very emotional. Like, it's a very, very sad book. It makes you think about some really deep topics. Like, we're talking death, illness, family, heartbreak. It's like, you need to be prepared for that. Out of the 4 stories, I thought the first story was a great starting point, actually. It exemplified the concept pretty well, let the audience know about all of the rules, which would like come back later. We also get the woman coming back into the story later as well. You know, like I was saying before, her boyfriend has left to go work abroad, and she went back in time because she has something that she wanted to say to him. And I did struggle at first. I had to like re-listen to the first half because things could be explained better, I feel like. But once I got into it, boy. The second story, like I said, concerns a older married couple with obviously one of them having Alzheimer's, and I find that a very difficult topic personally because like my history with epilepsy, like I have a terrible memory, so like I constantly worry about that being in my future. It was depressing but heartwarming. I really sped through it for obvious reasons, and I almost cried. I tried not to, really hard, and also like both of them show up again like across the 4 stories. Like that is something that the book does really well. It's that building. All the characters were weaved through the stories, like it added to the world building, because obviously cafes have regulars, cafes have, you know, neighbours and friends of all the workers and all of that stuff, and it felt really natural. I did feel like the second story was trying a bit too hard. Like, you are a story about an elderly couple and one of them has dementia. Like, you don't need to try that hard. I'm already emotional. The third story focuses on like a friend of the cafe who has popped up in the first 2 stories, and she goes back in time to talk to her sister. She's sort of run away from the family business and gone her own way, and her sister was the one who stayed. So there's a lot of grappling with like familial duty and family, and I thought that was really well done. I think that's probably my favourite out of the 4. It also emotionally destroyed me. They all emotionally destroyed me, let's face it. Apart from the heartbreak one, that was more of a like expositional kind of thing. But it was really good, but like obviously the other three are like super, super emotional. So it's great in the sense that like that first story eased you in, and then it just got like blow after blow after emotional blow for the other three. And the last one follows one of the cafe staff, and she goes forward in time. I don't want to talk about this one at all because it not only ruined me emotionally, I did have a real issue with the sort of like message of it, kind of why the rating is lower than what you would expect. But so yeah, I mean, the concept of this book, really original. I think there is multiple books set in this cafe too, which I will definitely have to pick up. There is at least one story that like for sure I need to see, which is like they call The Woman in the Grey Dress. If you are a philosophical person, this will definitely hit for you, this book. There's a lot of messaging like the nature of choice, the impact of time, and you know, the nature of the human condition. I felt like the main message I took away from this book was like one of hope. Despite the fact that like people seek the cafe to go back in time, the motivation behind each visit is always like something to do with the future. Especially as like one of the rules of the cafe is like no matter what you say, you will not change the present or the future. This is a very sentimental book. It definitely appealed to me because I'm a very sentimental person. I feel like this quote kind of sums it up quite well. No matter what difficulties people face, they will always have the strength to overcome them. It just takes heart. The best of magical realism, I feel like, captures like the emotions of everyday people, and this book did that in spades. Every character sort of grew from their experience and found peace from those conversations. Personally, the translation was not my style per se. The prose felt quite basic, but I don't know if that... I mean, I don't know what the Japanese original text is like, so it's hard for me to make that kind of judgment on it. Something I noticed that it was very dialogue heavy. It almost like read like a, because obviously I listened to it as an audiobook, it read like a radio dramatization at some points. And then I looked it up, and he is apparently a playwright, so it makes perfect sense. And I feel like actually this book would work really well as a play. I was kind of disappointed that there was no cat featured anywhere, because like there's a cat on the cover. I was kind of expecting a cat. So yeah, this book didn't hit as much as Days at the Murasaki Bookshop for me, but I thought the concept was really well done. It was an emotional gut punch, and yeah, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars on Storygraph. And finally, I also read some Murakami, a small one, The Strange Library. I listened to it as an audiobook, and the edition I read was translated by Ted Goosen. It was indeed strange. So it's a short story, and the main character is a young boy who goes to the library to find books on like the economics of the Ottoman Empire. I think tax collection in the Ottoman Empire. He gets taken down to like this reading room that he's never been to before, and is confronted by a really strange old man, and he like takes our main boy off to like a prison cell where he's like, "You will learn this or I will eat your brain." He comes across like a sheep man who makes him like homemade donuts, and sort of a mystical young girl who talks with her hands. Of course, he will try to escape, and that sort of takes us through the story. It's apparently technically a novella for children, and it kind of really reminds me of like Oscar Wilde's stories for children, in the sense that like they're not really for children, but they are at the same time. It's weird. Or Coraline. Coraline is another one that is very much in that vein. Like children won't get the layers, but it's fine. So yeah, it's fairy tale style, and the surface story is like surrealist horror. Like to this day, I don't know if this is supposed to be like a nightmare, a parallel world, or like a fantasy world. And I actually really didn't mind. Like it was fine. I finished it. I had a good time. The main character was very passive. Like he doesn't really do much, bless him. He just lets things happen to him and like goes along with what everyone is telling him. But like, I guess that's probably one of the morals of this. Like I always felt reading this like he was going to be okay. I don't know if that was because he's young or if that's like Murakami's thing. I've heard that it might be his thing. But like I said, this is the first bit I've read, so I don't really want to judge too much. I felt like it could have been a great novella if it was like fleshed out a little bit more and given some more like, if the plot had more meat to it. It's kind of hard to really even judge it because it's so short. But it was like, it really reminded me of that episode of Doctor Who. In the sense that like it takes a thing that is supposed to be, you know, like an everyday thing, and makes it absolutely terrifying for children. I'm not talking about like the library episode specifically, but like, you know, in the way that in the way Doctor Who takes things like statues and makes them terrifying. Like this is like him taking a library and making it terrifying. And like he does some things that like come back into it at the end. The ending is such a gut punch, and it very much feels like it came out of nowhere. Again, like I don't know if this is a Murakami thing or if this is just like, I don't know. And it's possible that there were things that I missed that I was just so questioning. This is a very, very strange one. I also felt like by the time I'd cemented like concrete opinions about things, the story was over. Sorry if this is a terrible review, but I just feel like that's how it goes sometimes. I felt like I did not understand this book, and yeah, I feel like there were probably some things to do with like grief in there, but again, like it wasn't explored in such a way that was satisfying. I know I did miss out on some of the like visual elements of this book because I listened to it as an audiobook. Apparently it has like very old school like illustrations and stuff, but I felt like this was a good way to like dip my toe into Murakami, so that when I want to make a separate video and read a couple of his books or a few of his books and sort of do that there. So I feel like this was a good way of me dipping my toe and figuring out like what kind of things he writes and how he writes, because I know he's big in magical realism. So this was, my little entry. So yeah, that was my episode 2 of reading translated fiction. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, like I said, I don't really know where I'm going next. It'll probably be Europe, because I feel like I've had 2 episodes in Asia now. I need to jump a little bit, but I just don't know where. Like I want to take a trip to Daunt Books to pick out some different things to read, so I might make that a vlog actually. I don't know. Honestly, like it's probably instinct. I will just go and find a book and be like, I'll read that, and then pick other books from that same country too. So yeah, happy reading.